Welcome to the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata for NCW Life. Well, today we're going to take a look at foreign policy in our second segment. Just a quick review of foreign policy from Vietnam all the way to Ukraine. A failed foreign policy, in my opinion. We'll also have some news for you. We are not reviewing the campaigns today. We're going to do that next week. We told you we would. We'll lay out all the campaigns next week that are going to be in the primary, including a Proposition 1 from our fire departments. We'll have all that next week for you before the ballots drop. We'll be right back with the news and a little review of foreign policy. All right, before we get to our review on foreign policy in the next segment, I want to go over some news stories. Some you've heard, maybe some you have not. On the national scene, of course, the big stories have all come out of the Supreme Court. Roe versus Wade. On the last show, we told you that was coming. It happened the next day. It has prompted a lot of political maneuvering by both sides. The fact is, it is not a ruling on women's rights. It is a ruling on the 10th Amendment. It basically puts it back to the states. Now, that is correct under the Constitution. There is no argument about that. But of course, it emboldened the pro-abortion folks to go crazy and say a lot of really crazy things. Now, I'm not saying both sides don't get out of hand, but the bottom line is it has really prompted some crazy comments from folks across the United States and some big political moves. Jay Inslee saying he's going to create a constitutional amendment for the state of Washington to guarantee abortion rights. Patty Murray put an immediate $1 million purchase of TV ads against Tiffany Smiley, her opponent this fall, saying she's pro-life, and if she was elected, that would give Mitch McConnell a potential majority in the Senate and that abortion would be banned across the United States. Well, that's probably not going to happen. What's worse about that, Miss Murray, Senator Murray, is that you're supporting abortion to birth, basically abortion at any time up to birth. You have supported that for some time, along with Representative Schreier. And the fact is only 21% of the people, about 20 to 21% of the people in the United States, support that position. The more popular position by far, at about 70%, is abortion with limits, with a limit of number of weeks or when the baby is viable. That is the popular position across the U.S. That is likely to be the most popular position in most of the states. There may be a few that do ban abortions. There may be many, I'm sure there will be, that will allow limited abortions. But the bottom line is it goes back to the states. In Washington state, nothing really changes, other than we may see this abortion tourism industry that, again, Jay Inslee has promoted, saying anybody that wants an abortion can come here. You're welcome in Washington state. So this is yet to play out. We'll be following it. The Democrats, progressive Democrats, feel they have a big leverage now that may change things in the fall. We'll see. It's a long time to the fall, and these news stories don't tend to last. This one may hang a while. But remember, 70% say abortion with restrictions. Only 21% want unlimited abortion. So you'll have a choice this fall. Also, the Supreme Court weighed in on the EPA restricting emissions from power plants. This is interesting because it is, again, a constitutional finding that says the limits must be put together by Congress. Congress must pass a bill to do that. The EPA can't just arbitrarily go out and say, we don't like your emissions. We think they should be half of what they are. That's up to Congress to decide, and that's what the court found. The court also found locally that a Bremerton coach had the right to go out after the game and pray on the field. And that is, of course, reciprocating throughout, bouncing all over politically as well, because that followed on the other finding that the religious schools could certainly accept government money or vouchers, which has been in question for some time. So a lot of movement from the Supreme Court this month. Of course, gun rights came into play too, and now we'll go back to Washington State for a minute. There are a couple of gun laws coming in Washington State. Only 2 were passed this year. One was a ban on magazines over 10 rounds. So these are the clips or magazines, 10 rounds. Now will be the only thing you can buy in Washington State. This is primarily about purchasing. If you already have a larger capacity magazine, it's still legal. But it had prompted a huge sales from the gun shops were telling us that the sales on these things over the past few weeks were off the charts. And so we'll see how that works out in the long run, but it's basically on the not selling the product. You can still obtain it. The other one is on ghost guns. These are guns that are manufactured by 3D printers and such, or by components and do not necessarily have serial numbers. And so this is a complete ban on those guns without numbers, and I think it has a couple of different pieces in it as it moves forward. Let's see what else is happening July 1st. These are laws that are coming in while we're doing it. License plates, it's the talk of social media. License plate fees are going way up to cover a $17 billion transportation package. No, they didn't raise the gas tax. And no, they didn't raise tab fees directly, but indirectly they raised all the other fees that have to do with licensing. Plates go from, for original license plate, go from $10 up to $50. That's a 400% increase in the cost of a license plate. A replacement plate goes from $10 to $30. There's just tons of other fee increases, including the temporary license that you get, the paper license you get on a new vehicle. Dealers now paying $40 for those instead of $15, a massive 250% increase. And the beat goes on. Transfer fees and other things, anything to do with transportation and licensing outside of gas tax and tabs went up. And one of the reasons that happened is because those particular taxes aren't protected by the 18th Amendment. And so this package has a great deal to do with non-highway projects, transit, and bicycle lanes and pedestrian measures. So it's not the giant increase in road capacity or road work that we wanted to see. It's more of a blend, and by doing the taxes this way, first of all, they're not as visible in an election year. And second of all, they are not covered under 18th Amendment. A new report from Washington State, also very interesting, conflicting report. There was as you know, a survey or a group of folks going around doing focus groups across the state on income tax, and in the process they got an earful about business competitiveness. And the chairman of that committee, the Finance Committee, which I served on for 14 years, is Noelle Frame. She's a Democrat, a progressive Democrat, by the way, and she has claimed for a long time that the taxes on business have no effect on the competitiveness. This is a position held by many progressives. But of all things, a study which was reported from the Lieutenant Governor's office, also a Democrat, Denny Heck, Lieutenant Governor, put out a study, a pretty extensive study that says, no, that's simply not true. Taxes do have an effect. But what's even worse is that the number and myriad of taxes on small business in Washington State is now exceeding virtually any state in the union, about 25 new taxes and fees over the past few years. And it's not just the tax itself that makes us anti-competitive, it is all the procedure that goes with it, how to pay it, how to administer it, how to calculate it. And the administrative and regulatory framework around that is substantial compared to other states. And this report from the Lieutenant Governor's office says clearly it's having a very detrimental effect on new businesses locating in Washington State and small businesses continuing in Washington State. Well, Seattle, we like to bring up Seattle because it's kind of the benchmark of the progressive agenda, is now rated one of the worst run cities in the United States. A report put out by Fox 13 News, picked up by Fox 13 News, says that Seattle and Tacoma are two of the worst run states in the United States. There was 150 of the largest cities were looked at with various variables. Mostly, the bulk of this is what was the quality of the services provided by these cities versus the amount of tax money spent to administer them. And that's where Tacoma and Seattle both fell very poorly. Tacoma ranked 139th out of 150 for providing services at cost. The cost is way too high for the amount of services provided. Seattle ranked 118th out of 150. Actually, they rated pretty high on services, but they also have a huge tax situation there. And so the cost of those services is excessively high, moving them to 118th position. Spokane did better overall. Interesting, the third largest city. Spokane was at 58th, but ranked worse than Seattle and Tacoma in safety and crime, which I thought was very interesting. To beat Seattle, you have to have a pretty bad criminal situation, and evidently Spokane is among the worst. Oh, by the way, who was the worst? Washington, D.C. placed 150th for worst services at the highest cost. And the number one best city in the United States, of course, is in Idaho. It is Nampa, Idaho, which provided the best services by far with the lowest tax rates anywhere in the Pacific Northwest or, frankly, in the United States. That was a United States survey. Okay, another Seattle milestone for you. Since 2020, reported gunshots in the city of Seattle have risen 40%. Actually, they rose 40% in 2021. And then an additional 50% in 2020, 21, 22. So we're seeing a huge amount of, these are reported gunshots, but of course the deaths and the murders and everything follow, they're all up. But here's a trend that is very interesting. It can be expected. In 2021, only 18% were revolving around homeless areas. These reported gunshots or shootings were about 18%. It has risen to well over 20% in 2022 and is climbing monthly. The local sheriffs say that these homeless camps have become a magnet for crime. A huge amount of drug dealing is going on and other buying and selling of goods, of course, black market. And so there are bound to be disagreements and guns involved in that situation. Last but not least, in Seattle, Sound Transit reports that more and more people are failing to pay the fares on the light rail system and other systems, and they are losing even more money. They're not really able to enforce those fares, evidently. At least they're not trying, and people have come to learn that that's okay. So they are losing tons of money on Sound Transit. What's new there? Here in town, we got to come right back to Wenatchee when we talk about crime. Talked to one of the managers at a local grocery store. I was looking for one of those little plastic baskets to go shopping with, and he told me that there weren't any. They have replaced over 200 of them in the past month, and they've all gone away. People just take them. Homeless folks help themselves to groceries and walk right out the door and keep going. Some people are commenting that they're not paying 8 cents for a bag, so they will just take the cart instead, or the basket. And speaking of baskets, the large roller baskets, the grocery carts, only 28 left in this store out of over 120 a month or two ago. He alluded to the fact that the stores may just not be able to provide those carts or those baskets in the near future. By the way, tells us that anywhere from 8 to 10 incidents a day of shoplifting is an average $3,000 to $4,000 worth of goods any given day go out of this particular grocery store, and there's not much they can do about it. Last but not least, on the local scene, school decreases have folks concerned, and they should. The Wenatchee School District reported that there's probably going to be about 750 less students in the next few years, which will create a funding problem for them. I would say that's not unexpected. They still have not returned to full capacity from the COVID situation. Statewide, over 40,000 kids left public schools, and the fact is they have not all come back. And I expect if the schools continue to operate under the current conditions, more kids will be leaving for private schools or homeschooling. All right, that's the news. We'll be right back to do a little review on foreign policy. It's about time we took another look. We'll reflect back to some of the shows we've done with our friend Alan Vexler from Russia and talk about why you're not getting the whole story on Ukraine and why our foreign policy is failing. Welcome back. Let's take a brief review. This could take a show or two to do, but we're just going to take a brief review of foreign policy and the failed foreign policy, in my opinion, of the United States over many, many, many years. You can go clear back to Vietnam and, and do an analysis of that one and say, maybe not such a good idea when we look back. But let's go a little bit closer and talk about Iraq. We went into Iraq, we did what we did, and is Iraq better off now than they were before? Not likely. It's kind of divided into 3 different countries. The Kurds up in the north are still having issues with Turkey and still having issues with the main country. The government is not totally stable at this point. And in the process of invading Iraq and doing what we did, we created ISIS, which means we had to go back and clean that mess up to some extent, although it's still, around. We did have to go back. We did successfully clean that up. Now, I will take one piece out of that was successful. I'll give the original George Bush credit for getting Iraq out of Kuwait. They had no right to get into a foreign country. We pushed them back to the borderline, did some damage, and we walked away. I think that probably was the most successful foreign policy in a long time. But outside of that, Iraq has not turned into a very good investment. Libya. Do you really know much about Gaddafi? If you do read a little bit about him, you can say whatever you want about him personally, but he did a lot of good things for Libya. He stabilized the country. He brought the economy back, actually improved it pretty dramatically. He provided 4-year education and trade schools for virtually everybody in the country at a very low price. And he built their agricultural system through a series of government projects on water and irrigation. Frankly, Gaddafi had Libya running pretty well. And of course, we went in and basically took him out. Since then, Libya has been unstable. The governments have switched. Leadership has switched. It is not what it was. Again, it's not better off than it was before, and what was really gained. Of course, one of the problems was Gaddafi was aligned with Saddam Hussein and Russia and others who wanted to use different currency for oil. They were pushing hard to not make the U.S. currency, the dollar, the reserve currency for oil, and that tends to be a pattern we're seeing here. Afghanistan, do I really need to get into that? 20 years in Afghanistan, all the lives lost, all the money spent, and billions of dollars of weapons left there. For what? The people that originally we were fighting against, the Taliban, who have now taken over the country and sent it back into the third world. As far as women go and other rights, it's a mess. It's no better than it was before. We spent trillions in 20 years and most importantly lost lives there. Syria was a little different story. We went in, tried to get involved in that, and fortunately, I say this, fortunately Russia came in and stabilized the situation. We did not want a direct confrontation with Russia, so we basically did what we did, cleaned up some ISIS things and backed down. But that was not a good situation as well. Now let's get to the main frame here. Ukraine. Ukraine became independent in 1991. The Russian, I should say, the USSR had fallen. Russia was regrouping, and Ukraine was independent in 1991. And frankly, from 1991 forward, they had very few issues. They were working with Russia. They had a working relationship, and even being independent, they did very well. Move forward to 2014 when the Orange Revolution came about, and basically it was a coup, and the United States, Barack Obama and company came in with their Secretary of State, backed it completely, and installed another U.S.-based president who was then replaced later by the current president, Zelensky. One of the reasons the original was replaced was because he didn't do what he said he was going to do, and frankly, from 2014 forward, Ukraine had fallen apart. Economically, it was coming apart. Civil war was happening with the Donbass region. The Russian-speaking eastern side of the country was under attack by its own government. They were not allowed to vote. There was constant friction there. Zelensky said he could fix that. He made it worse, if anything. And so things in Ukraine were not good. As a matter of fact, most of the talent left. A lot of them went to Poland. If you remember, we had an interview with a Polish national not too long ago who said that they have they've become number one in IT in Poland, IT graduates, because of a lot of the folks coming out of Ukraine. A lot of the talent came from Ukraine. They also went to several other countries in the area, but the brain trust, so to speak, Ukraine was leaving. And the country was basically coming apart. During that same time, NATO was moving forward. And of course, this is what startled Vladimir Putin, is there was numerous promises made in this time frame over many years that NATO would not move forward. They would not advance to the Russian border, but they kept advancing to the point of putting missile systems on the border of Russia in Poland, missile systems that were not totally defensive. They were completely capable of launching offensive missiles. Now, the movement for 214, the reason to change the government in Ukraine is Ukraine was being pushed by the United States very hard to become a part of NATO and also allow U.S. troops and bases in Ukraine. They wanted to have that as another outpost to surround Russia. And of course, that was something that Putin could not tolerate. So when the eastern side of Ukraine finally decided to declare independence, it gave Putin the green light to come in basically and defend those folks, Russian-speaking folks, that had been at war with President Zelensky for some time. And that is really what has transpired. You've heard news that Putin has had economic problems and issues. Well, there are some, but the fact is the ruble, the Russian ruble, is now the most stable currency and the most sought-after currency. It's up 42%. It's considered one of the best currencies in the world. Now, that's created its own problems because of international trade for Putin, but Russia has a very stable currency. One of the reasons is that Putin tied it to gold. That was a very smart thing to do when the ruble was dropping when the war first started. Also, oil sales are up because of the boycotts by Europe and the United States. It has pushed the price of oil, as we know, American citizens so well, push the price up, the barrel of oil between $150 and $120. That allows President Putin to sell that oil at a much higher price, deriving much more funding, bringing in much more money than he ever has from petro sales. Even with the boycotts, he can still sell to China, India, Brazil, and others, and even give them a discount. So those countries actually are getting a benefit from our lousy foreign policy. All those restraints on Russia have done nothing, as our former guest Alan Wexler told us a few years ago, several years ago. He said that these restraints on Russia have actually helped Russia because they've had to create their own economies. I'll give you a perfect example. McDonald's pulled out completely. We talked about this a few weeks ago, pulled out of Russia completely. And within a few months, Russia had taken over all those restaurants with their own company and have lines around the block of people wanting to do business with a Russian company that replaced it. They've done this in several instances. And so the economy of Russia, while it still has issues, is not doing as badly as you might hear. So the point of the matter is, it seems that most everything we've done in foreign policy has worked against not only the people that we're trying to help, but against our own situation in terms of spending, losing lives, and deficits. I mean, we just gave $40 billion more to Ukraine, which just prolongs the inevitable situation. There's no analyst in the world that thinks Ukraine is going to win over Russia without complete, backing of the U.S. military. It's probably never going to happen, but we keep prolonging it, and we're doing it with borrowed money. We're still spending well in excess of what we take in. Folks, we need a complete revamp of foreign policy. Talked about this for 20 years, and I hope that the next administration that comes in will regroup and decide some of this stuff just isn't our business, and we need to stay out of it. We'll be right back to wrap it up. Well, that's it for today. Just a very short snapshot of failed foreign policy. We've got to change direction on this. And by the way, if you haven't gone back and reviewed those Russian interview shows with Alan Wexler, they're at ncwlife.com, full episodes. You need to do that. Virtually everything he has told us has been accurate, and we started in 2019 on this issue. I hope you'll do that. All right, next week we're going to lay out all those campaigns, tell you who's running for what. The ballots are coming. It's primary time. We'll have it all for you next week, right here on the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata for NCW Life.